Okay, hello and welcome everyone to the Resides Science Club. The Resides Club is a self-organizing initiative that is entirely CR-led. We host weekly seminars that aim to raise awareness and provide training in reproducible, interpretable, open and transparent science. Today's talk is hosted by the Igdor Right Science Club. I would just like to explain first that people who registered have had a chance to send us some questions that they would like to have answered. We also have a Q&A session after the talk, but everyone can ask questions in the chat room. And then at the end, I'll start with the questions we had in advance. And then if we have time, we'll move on to the questions that were asked in the chat room. Today's speaker is Dr. Rebecca Willén, an independent researcher in psychology with professional interests in research ethics, research methodology, and forensic psychology. In 2016, Dr. Willén finished her PhD at the University of Gothenburg, Sweden, with a thesis on police interviewing techniques and verbal deception detection. Dr. Rebecca Willén is the founder of Igdor, an independent virtual research institute, and a strong proponent of open and replicable science. Dr. Rebecca Willén.
Hi, so I'm begin or yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to give this talk. Well, my background was already introduced a bit. PhD in psychology from University of Gothenburg, with a focus on legal investigative psychology and law. You find my personal website at rmvlén.info. I have a blog, you can check it out, my email address. You can also find me on a forum. I will talk a little bit about that later on scienceandacademia.org. You can find me there as Rebecca. You can also find me on Twitter. I'm not fond of Twitter. So I prefer the forum, but you can also reach me on Twitter. And you find the Igdor's website, igdor.org. I will begin by saying a little bit about the terms I use. Open science, a set of public archiving practices. Replicable science, a set of methodological and statistical practices that minimize the risks of research not being possible to replicate. And open and replicable science, which means both. Usually, psychologists say open science, and they mean both open and replicable science. But there is a reason why those two terms shouldn't be confused. So I will try to be consistent in saying open and replicable science, but I will fail. But this is pretty much how I use the terms. You can find more about this on this link on my blog. I'm not convinced that every attendee here on the seminar is already up to date with the terms, with open and replicable science. But I will assume you are in this talk. So if you're not, then you can open this link right away and read up on what it means. because I will not offer any further descriptions of these terms during the talk. I will spend about 20 minutes on talking about the reasons for having Igdor, for launching it at all from the beginning. And then I will continue with talking about what Igdor is for about 15 minutes, something like that. I will probably fail with this too, and use more time, but approximately. So, 200 years ago, Charles Babbage, a mathematician and scientist, wrote this book, Reflections on the Decline of Science in England and on some of its causes. This was in 1830, almost 200 years ago. He wrote about an academia that is falling apart. He wrote about public funds being wasted on superfluous administration. He wrote on people in academia having a focus on careers rather than truth-seeking. He wrote about universities being too competitive. There were too few positions for scientists working in academia. So people who are passionate about truth-seeking cannot actually stay and work and focus on doing good science. And he wrote about questionable research practices such as p-hacking, and people were trying to get results that looked good, but were not actually true. So a lot about the problems that we see in academia today were described already 200 years ago. I'm sorry, there is an alarm of some sort. Let me know if anyone else hears it and is disturbed by it. Otherwise, I will just continue. About 80 years later, after Babbage's book, we have Santiago Ramon y Cajal writing his advice for a young investigator. And he writes, now that scientific research has become a regular profession on the payroll of the state, the observer can no longer afford to concentrate for extended periods of time. Research is now frantic. So this is about 120 years ago. Cajal found it problematic that there was such a strong focus on quantity rather than quality, and that researchers could no longer focus on being creative, ponder on projects for a long time. That was 120 years ago, and it hasn't got much better since then. And here's a quote from Babbage from his book Reflections on the Decline of Science in England. So about 200 years ago, 190 years ago. That science has long been neglected and declining is not an opinion originating with me, but is shared by many and has been expressed by higher authority than mine. Whilst instances of opposition have been very rare, a silent resignation to circumstances has been the most usual mode. So almost 200 years after Babbage and over 100 years, 120 years since Cajal's book, Brian Nosek, the founder of Center for Open Science, wrote this tweet. It was 2019 in March. My university is piloting a new system for faculty annual reports. Regardless of intent, the implementation communicates that quantity matters, not quality. Filling out these items yearly creates the wrong culture and mindset about how to succeed in research. And there is a photo of a screenshot of some of the items included in the yearly faculty annual reports. Number of completed peer-reviewed publications, number of unpublished incomplete projects, age index, annual citation count, annual patents count, etc. And I replied to Brian on Twitter, if the university hosting COS, Center for Open Science, and a bunch of brilliant people leading the replicability movement, if they still can't get the incentives right, when and where can we expect universities to change? We're on the 9th year of the revolution, the transparency revolution, the open replicable science revolution. And this university is one of the places where it started. University of Virginia is one of the universities where the whole open and replicable science revolution started, but they're still focusing on quantity, not on quality. So when can we expect universities to change? Can we expect them to change? And what change do we actually want? So in gray here, you see the some of the items that Brian Nosek mentioned. Number of completed peer-reviewed publications, age index, annual citation count. And in black and green, you have a number of items that I have written that are part of the movement for open and replicable science. What we who are proponents of open and replicable science say that we should focus on. Number of, or perhaps we're not saying number, but I think that this is what will happen when we add open and replicable science. If the system, the underlying system, is still focusing on quantity, then this is what will happen, that we just add a number of items that people need to respond to and try to reach high numbers on every year. Number of completed peer-reviewed publications that are open access, that were pre-registered, that has open data, open materials, open code. Number of completed registered reports, number of active pre-registrations, number of preprints, number of projects on open science framework, number of completed many labs collaborative projects, number of incomplete many labs collaborative projects, annual open licenses count, annual open badges count. The list can continue. So if people were drowning before, what will happen when we add the requirements for open and replicable science? This is why I argue that open and replicable science cannot save us from academia, from the underlying system. The system itself is broken. It's a destructive system focusing on quantity rather than quality. And open and replicable science will not change that. Researchers will continue to find shortcuts to meet those goals. We can already see that people are pre-registering, but they are not doing it in a very good way. People are sharing data, but they may not share a complete and honest data set. Therefore, we will continue to have bad science. We will just have new hiding places for it. We'll continue to have questionable research practices, but new types. They will be more difficult to identify, even more difficult to identify, because right now we can't identify them. We can't read a scientific paper, an empirical paper, and read the methods and say that, hey, here the people have used questionable research practices, because it's hidden. Only the people who are involved in the research themselves directly will know whether it was conducted in a good way or not. And this will continue. So how to change the actual system? How to remove the pressure to publish? How to remove the culture of destructive competitiveness? How to move focus from quantity to quality? How to move focus from careers to truth-seeking? So this is where Igdor comes in. A new academia, a new system. A new system would allow researchers and graduate students to be with their family and friends. A new system would encourage short working hours as proposed by Cajal or described by Cajal in his 1897 piece, the book Advice for a Young Investigator. A new system would encourage slow and deep thinking. It would encourage doubt and criticism and always promote honesty and truth-seeking. It would actively discourage quantity and quick fixes. It would make it safe to fail. Astro Teller is, or was, I'm not sure if he's still the manager at Google X, a laboratory that he describes as a moonshoot factory, a place where they're going to do huge dream projects to change the world, really, really huge projects that can actually change everything. And he did a TED talk on this a few years ago in 2016. And here's a quote from that transcript from that TED talk in 2016. The moonshot factory is a messy place, but rather than avoid the mess, pretend it's not there, we have tried to make that our strength. We spend most of our time breaking things and trying to prove that we are wrong. That's it. That's the secret. Run at all the hardest parts of the problem first. Get excited and cheer. Hey, how are we going to kill our project today? Astro Teller calls it enthusiastic skepticism. And he continues, this is how we actually make it happen. The only way to get people to work on big, risky things is if you make that the path of least resistance. We work hard to make it safe to fail. Teams kill their ideas as soon as the evidence is on the table because they are rewarded for it. They get applause from the peers, hugs and high fives. They get promoted for it. We have bonused every single person on teams that ended their projects. Not teams that finished their projects, not teams that managed to publish a number of articles in peer-reviewed papers, in peer-reviewed journals, but every single person on teams that ended the projects, that managed to kill the project. This is so completely different from how academia works. We work hard to make it safe to fail. This is how science should work. That we should practice enthusiastic skepticism. We should actively try to kill our projects. When I launched Igdor back in 2016, that was the same year as I finished my PhD. The idea was much more simple. I didn't want to be pressured into doing bad science. That was one main thing. Another main thing was that I didn't want to force my family to move away from Indonesia, where we were then residing. It worked very well for especially for my daughter there. And I did a job interview in UK in April. I went from Bali, where I lived, on a flight back to UK, to Manchester. And when I packed for this travel to do the job interview was for a few days. And when I packed for it on Bali, I didn't have any suitable clothes. I didn't have any jacket or something like that, because I only had my things for Bali, for Indonesia, flip-flops. And now I did buy a couple of shoes. But I thought, well, how bad can it be? It's April. It can't be really that bad. I can live without a jacket. Well, I was completely wrong. It was bad. It was really bad. So it was that experience. That was my first time, still only time, I think, in UK. And it was on the train back to Manchester from that job interview that I looked out through the window. And it was fog. It was a bit of rain. It was very gray, very, very gray. It was cold. And I felt that, no, I don't want to move away from Indonesia. I don't want to force my family to move away from Indonesia. And that was on that train, that was when I decided to give it a try, to start Igdor instead, and not apply for more jobs in traditional academia. So that was the second thing. The third thing was that I needed somewhere to host my grants while working location independently. Because if I was going to stay in Indonesia, then I didn't know anything about that part of the world, or how to apply for grants, or if I wouldn't be allowed to get grants there either. So, but the Swedish, I know how Swedish academia works and Swedish funding agencies. So I thought that if I start a Swedish company, then I can host my own grants there. And the fourth, so if I'm anyway starting up a legal unit to host my research, then I could just as well accept others also to use this company. So that was the original idea. It was much more simple. It was not so much philosophy. It was much more practical. So that was a bit on why, the background behind Igdor, the philosophy behind Igdor. And now I'll continue by talking about Igdor itself, what it is and what we do. Institute for Globally Distributed Open Research and Education, Igdor. We are an independent research institute that is dedicated to improving the quality of science, science education, and quality of life for scientists, students, and their families. The quality of life for people in academia is very important in order to make people feel safe to fail, to make people feel safe to blow the whistle, to make people feel safe to do good science. Igdor's researchers and students can be with family and friends. They can be where they can live and reside where they want to or need to be. With Igdor, you have an increased flexibility. You can choose to do part-time work. You can choose to work from home. You can choose to work from co-working spaces, etc. Igdor, there's no institutional pressure to publish when you're working at Igdor. You may still feel a pressure to publish because you're still part of academia. Yeah, let me clarify that. So I talk about traditional academia when I talk about universities, etc., how things usually work, and things we usually think of when we talk about academia. I call that traditional academia, and I argue that Igdor is still part of academia. We're just part of a new type of academia. There is no pressure to participate in administration, faculty meetings, etc. No pressure to teach. You can do what you want to do. You can focus on your science when you're affiliated with Igdor. And we have a very heavy focus on quality, a heavy focus on open and replicable science. Igdor offers affiliation to researchers that are willing to adhere to our code of conduct. Our code of conduct, our COC, is currently the one University of Eindhoven in Netherlands, Technical University of Eindhoven, where Daniel Lakens and the others are. We have borrowed their COC, and in that COC there is a strong focus on truth-seeking and open and replicable science. I will talk a little bit more about our COC later on. We offer some basic administration, such as email, grant hosting, funding statements, etc. If people need a funding statement from their institution about saying that, okay, this person doesn't have any funding to pay for article processing charges, etc. And then we can offer that. We offer assistance to researchers that are new to open and replicable science. I'll talk a bit more about that later on too. We aim to offer assistance to researchers that are new to open and replicable science. We offer second chances to researchers who have admitted scientific misconduct. So if you are a researcher who have engaged in scientific fraud or something else, questionable research practices, and you have admitted that, yeah, I've done this and that was bad, then we are willing to accept you as a researcher at Igdor. We will need to talk to you about it. We need to have an open dialogue about it. But generally, we do offer second chances. We also offer occasional screening of COC adherence. I say offer because I think that this is something that should be practiced at all universities. I think it's a good thing that there is someone checking in on us, and that we are not simply trusted as researchers at the institution where we are. We should be able to show that what we have done is correct, that we have not employed questionable research practices, etc. We should be able to show the evidence. We should not be sad or feel criticized by people asking us for the evidence. That is, we do offer that at Igdor, occasional screening of COC adherence. We don't offer any salaries. We can offer formal employment, but it does require that you have your own funding, that we host your grant or something like that. Then we can offer formal employment as required by the funding agencies. but we don't pay salaries ourselves. Igdor is a federation, meaning that people can start up their own thing and have that company or organization included in the Igdor Federation. I'm on the global board. Can someone confirm that you see the pointer?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, great, thanks. So I'm on the global board, and we decide on who should be allowed to get affiliated with us. Individual researchers, and our individual researchers do research and offer teaching, may offer teaching, etc. The global board is also the entity deciding on organizations, individual organizations that may want to be affiliated with us. We currently have thriving Human Science Center in the Netherlands. We have contemporary issues in animal behavioral science in Croatia, led by Liadka Ostojic. And we did have Yayasan Igdor Indonesia, the Bali campus, which I was running. So many people have thought of the Bali campus as the main Igdor thing. But that was actually just one individual organization that did get quite some attention. It was an unsuccessful project that is closed now. But yeah, that was just one of the individual organizations under Igdor. So if someone listening, someone who's already affiliated with Igdor, or someone who would be interested in getting affiliated with Igdor, said that, hey, I want to start a school, I want to start a lab, or whatever it may be, I want to start a retreat center for researchers in Nepal or Florida, then we would say, hey, yes, sounds like a great idea. We'd love that. And you could start that up, and then you would be an individual organization affiliated with Igdor, but still doing your own thing. If you choose to do it as a limited company, then that's up to you. We don't have anything to do with funding of it, or you're using our name, our logo, and if you one day feel that, hey, Igdor is not very good for us anymore because Igdor has chosen to do that or this or that, then you can leave. And if we one day feel that, no, that particular lab is not actually doing good science, and we have talked with them about it, but they are not happy to change it, they want to continue what they are doing, then we can choose to cut the ties. So it's a mutual understanding. We have an advisory board. It has one member right now. It's not very active. We do have collaborators. For example, we have Mullvad VPN, which means that all research, everyone who is affiliated with Igdor has free VPN from Mullvad. And I'm actually using their facility right now. You need Mullvad, for example, to use Sci-Hub. Did I say Mullvad? You need VPN to reach Sci-Hub. VPN is important for other reasons as well, but and all universities typically have VPN, and so do we. The core organizations in Igdor is, I have written Stiftelsen Igdor Sweden, a foundation, non-profit foundation. This one is actually not completely created yet. Right now we only have Igdor Sweden AB, a limited company, and that one is supposed to take care of the research consultancy. But the limited company will be owned by a foundation, and the foundation is the entity that will take care of grant hosting in Sweden. The global board, we are 5 members, Paula Masuso, Dr. Gavin Taylor, Daniel Berntsson, and Enrico Fucci. Enrico lives in Fuerteventura. He's from Italy, but he likes to surf, so he's on Fuerteventura. Daniel and I are in Sweden, Gothenburg. Gavin is an Australian who currently lives in Brazil. Paula is an Italian currently living in Belgium. And formerly, previously we had Sofie Österberg, who is a psychologist in Sweden. We had Antonio Schettino, who is, he's here today, I think. One more Italian. We seem to have a thing with, yeah. Hi, Antonio. We seem to have a thing with Italian people. And previously we also had Johanna Habermann from Germany. Sofie Österberg, who previously was on the global board, she is still taking care of Igdor Sweden. Paula is there too. Hi, Paula. And I realized that I should have had Antonio here too, because he had done quite some things with a survey, an open science survey. We have Alexander from Russia. I will not try to say his family name because I've never heard it. I've only seen it written. Alexander takes care of the website and does a lot of things on the forum, on Science and Academia forum. And then we have Lena, a Swedish accountant. In Igdor, we currently focus on administration. We are trying to survive. We are drowning in administration. That's the truth. So we do lots and lots and lots of administration. And then we try to take care of on Science and Academia forum. When we find time, then we try to work on concept building, community building, and starting up an educational platform. The Campus Bali was a project that is permanently closed. It didn't work out financially. We needed income and we didn't have that, so we just had lots and lots of expenses, so we had to close that. The research consultancy is temporarily paused because we don't have the time to engage in it properly. Because of all the administration. Hopefully one day we will have funding enough to hire someone to take care of the administration, and then we can work more on building Igdor. And here are some things that we are, when we have time, some time left from all the administration, then we are trying to look at the concept building. We are trying to discuss whether we should enforce or encourage good practices. The COC that we have is the Eindhoven ones, as I said before. We hope to modify it to be more strict in regards to open and replicable science. But we're also discussing a lot whether we should enforce or encourage good practices. That is, should we check in on people and see that they are actually employing open and replicable science? Should we say that our researchers have to publish open access, for example, or that our researchers who engage in empirical science have to pre-register the research or share the data? I think something that will happen rather soon is that we at least will publish a statement somewhere saying that if someone requests data from one of our researchers and you are declined to take part of the data from an Igdor researcher, then you should be able to, you are encouraged to contact the global board or if we say, if we have another representative, and share your complaints with us, and we will do we will discuss it with the researcher in question and help the one who asked for the data or materials to access it. I think that at least will happen pretty soon. I can mention that we practice consensus in the global board, so each and every member on the global board has to agree, or at least step aside from a decision when we decide on big things. And not everything goes through the global board, because we do encourage people to do their own things, to run their own projects. I will, okay. I just want to mention that I don't see what people write. I saw that people wrote something in the chat, and I don't see that now when it happens. I will look at it later. And we have a huge discussion on the behavioral policy. Should we have a behavioral policy? If so, how to phrase it? Because our COC is only about scientific conduct. It's not about how people should behave towards each other. So should we have a behavioral policy? Again, should we enforce or encourage good behaviors? To be very honest, the behavioral policy thing came up after we were criticized concerning one of our researchers, John Tennant's. John unfortunately passed away last year. And we were criticized for how we handled criticism against him as a person, not regarding how he had conducted his research, but how he had behaved toward female colleagues in private, not at work. Well, there was one incident on work. So we thought that we would be able to decide on the behavioral policy much quicker than we did. We're quite reluctant, to be honest, to have a behavioral policy. If you want to ask questions about that, just go ahead. Please do. There are no questions that are too rude or I do welcome all types of questions. Affiliation, we're also discussing whether we should become more strict in who we accept to become affiliated. There are pros and cons. If we would become more strict, then that could strengthen our credibility. On the other hand, it gets more difficult for some people in the world, for some researchers in the world who are not from weird countries, to get affiliated, and that we don't want to do. So yeah, there are pros and cons. We are trying to launch educational projects on an educational platform where we offer MOOCs. We have plans on a privacy MOOC, a massive open online course. It's a collaboration with privacytools.io to offer a free MOOC on privacy software targeting the average computer user, people like myself. We did apply for funding unsuccessfully. The plan is to send in new applications. We also want to launch a MOOC, a massive open online scientist training that makes it possible for anyone in the world to get a professional scientist training. We're still drafting the curriculum. Paula and I are working on that. But as I said, we are working a lot with administration, so things are going very, very slowly. And the forum on scienceandacademia.org. This forum is mainly launched to create a space for people who want to move away from Twitter, for academics to move away from Twitter. Twitter is counterproductive for scientific discourse, for academic discourse, especially when trying to discuss controversial topics. Open and replicable science is one controversial topic. Whistleblowing is another. Diversity and inclusion is also a controversial topic that typically most people are pro diversity and inclusion, but it can be controversial to discuss how to reach enough diversity and inclusion. So not what, but how. And trying to discuss that on Twitter is not working. We do need many more words in order to express what we mean, in order to argue, and in a productive manner, in order to get somewhere. So On Science and Academia is hosted by Igdor, but it is not for Igdor. Everyone is welcome there, also people who are not part of academia, people who have never been in academia, but may be interested in learning more about academia. We also have closed categories there, private categories. We welcome warmly organizations that are, especially organizations that are working on open and replicable science, to have their own category on the forum. We have a few such organizations having their own private categories. So do check it out and do let us know if you want to have your own category in there. I've also had thoughts on having a category for whistleblowers somehow, or on whistleblowing. Categories can be private, they can be public, or they can be semi-public. So do check it out. Igdor's most important challenges right now is building institutional credibility to get funding and to get started with education. Institutional credibility is the main thing. Many people do not see us as part of academia. Many people do not see us as a credible option to academia. Others do. It's very mixed, but this is very important. It is crucial. We cannot survive without institutional credibility. In the long term, we will also not be able to survive without funding. So we need to get started with that. And education is part of both the funding part and the credibility part. And yeah, that was all. And now I've seen in the chat that there have been a few questions, but maybe someone from Igdor to take over now.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rebecca.
That was great. Very inspiring.
No, absolutely. Yeah, thank you very much, Sarah. Just trying to unmute my microphone. We will now move to the Q&A. I'll start with the questions that were asked in advance, if that's okay, Rebecca. So the first one. Someone who wasn't aware that you could be a independent researcher, and so they were asking if you collaborate with various academic institutions and/or private companies, and then as a resultant question from that is then they were asking, how do you obtain ethical clearance for your research?
Yeah, so that's different for different people. Basically, it is what you make it. You can be affiliated with several academic institutions or private companies. You can launch your own private company. In some disciplines, that is much more common than in others. In tech, it's very common to launch your own private company. I think biomedicine, psychology, no. But there are a few exceptions. So basically, a wide range of options. Ethical clearance is much more complicated, because that is so very different in different countries. In Sweden, we have a system that many people are terrified that when they hear about our system, because a lot of research in Sweden, empirical research, is not does not need to be ethically reviewed at all. So in Sweden, it's much easier, and everyone who is affiliated with Igdor can do research in Sweden, because we have a company in Sweden, and shortly also a foundation. We have tried to say something generally about ethical review, but it's so extremely different in different countries. So it's in US, I know that Ronin Institute can help out sometimes because they have collaborations with people in US. Ronin Institute is very focused on US, while Igdor has a stronger European focus. but Ronin Institute is one of our collaborators, an institute very similar to Igdor.
Okay, thank you. Another question, I think you already talked a little bit about this during the presentation, but someone was asking, how do you see the development of academia from the perspective of Igdor, and how can the changes and transformation of the traditional academic structure happen in a sustainable way?
Yeah, so I did talk about what we can expect. I don't think that we can expect traditional academia to change very much. It hasn't for 200 years, and I don't see any reason why that would change. The focus will continue to be on quantity rather than quality. But something we should not forget is also that there are many people who are very happy with how things are right now in academia, in traditional academia. So who am I or we to decide that traditional academia must change in our direction? Because many people are very happy with how it is. For different reasons, not only because not because they are bad scientists, some probably are, but not everyone. So I think the most reasonable thing to do if one is not happy with how things are is to leave for a place that is more in line with how you want things to be. And if such a place doesn't already exist, then you can create it yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, there's another question. So someone is also asking, and I think this is related to the publication of your RDS. So basically the question is if there's been any, or what has been the most unpleasant consequence for your for you in terms of the publication of RDS, and if there was any sort of unpleasant consequences. So I think this is more kind of their curiosity about your RDS questions.
And RDS means retroactive disclosure statement. And for those who may not already know, in my PhD thesis, I published retroactive disclosure statements describing when I had p-hacked and not, basically. And I have published additional such statements afterwards, saying in which study I did what, and being very transparent about and honest about the questionable research practices I have engaged in. What I can say is basically two things about that. One is that I don't have any references when I apply for academic jobs, and that has not been irrelevant when starting up Igdor. For my decision to start up Igdor, it's weird to say this about yourself, but since I don't have any references, there's no one else to say it. I was basically a top student, and I was working I did peer reviews for international journals my first month, I think, on my PhD program, in my PhD training. And I had 2 or 3 articles published in international journals at the time when I started my PhD training. My bachelor thesis is also published. So it went very well for me in the beginning in academia, in traditional academia. But I don't have any references, and it's not about only supervisors and colleagues, but basically everyone I knew from the department have refused to be a reference. So that is obviously a very difficult thing that hampers my academic career, so to say. It should also be mentioned that I didn't know that many people at my department, because I'm the type of person who focuses 100% on my own work and am quite uninterested in social stuff when I work. So I'm isolated in my office doing my things. So I don't get to know people, many people. But colleagues who have left the department have been very, very supportive, and I'm incredibly grateful to each one of them. Another thing I can say about this is that so the field, the specific field I come from, deception detection and interrogation research, is a sub discipline. It's a very, very, very small discipline. A very small area of research where you have maybe 5, 8 top professors in the world, and they are all collaborating, they all know each other. So if trying to blow the whistle, you don't have to blow the whistle very, very, very loudly. You can do it quite silently and still end up on a blacklist. Where it's very difficult to continue working in that area. So it's not about, you can easily get very silenced. So yeah, that's the two things: no references and very silenced.
Thank you. I think we'll ask one more question, just because I'm aware of the time as well. During the presentation and while you were talking about the structure of Igdor, and you mentioned about the behavioral aspect of it, someone was asking about. More than one person were actually talking about rather than just having rather than sort of mandating certain types of or expecting some certain types of behavior, if Igdor would consider more the fostering side as well, or the mentoring side of young scientists, and even like facilitating practice sessions with young scientists, again, in order to make sure that behavior and behavioral changes are almost built from scratch rather than mandating them.
Is this question about behavioral stuff, how people act towards each other, or is it about the scientific more?
I think the question, I think it sort of touches both of them. I think in terms of the question I'm reading actually asks about the behavior policy, but I think it makes probably more sense towards the scientific practices as well, almost like the mentoring side of where you from what I understand from the question, hosting or facilitating practice sessions. So rather than mandating, might there be a way to foster the desired behavioral outcomes through various recommended practice and the offer to practice them together?
Yeah. With regard to practicing open and replicable science and focus on quality rather than quantity, I think mentorship is the culture among those people you work most closely with will be the most important factor. But when regards behavioral stuff, whether people are good and nice and kind to each other, that's quite a different thing. Some people can do excellent science and they are extremely rude. They are arses. and if you're asking me personally, then I think it's people can stay in organization. They can be a bit more isolated so that they don't actually meet other people. And it's important that people have support and know that it's not you, it is him or her. But I do think that people can stay in the organization although they are bad people.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm just aware of the time as well. So, Rebecca, thank you very much for the great presentation. And
can we continue for those who are willing to, those who may have additional questions or?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think I'm happy to continue. Let me just check. Question-wise, so I think I've got a couple more questions. One of those questions, if you're okay to continue, one of those questions, I mean, during the presentation, you explained that one of the main things is that each person can be anywhere in the world. They don't necessarily need to be based physically in a near each other. But there was someone asking if you were at some point considering some form of a physical campus or a campus itself. So I think you already explained that it isn't the purpose of Igdor isn't because I think from these advanced questions, I think there was probably an initial idea that there will be a big connection to PhD training or even a campus as seeing academia as a university or a physical structure. So someone was actually asking if you were considering some form of campus, and
yeah, so I personally do have ideas. Of course, I always have. It would be great to have small places a little here and there where researchers can go and for a retreat, for a writing retreat, to be focused on the work. Maybe some small place in the Swedish mountains, etc., etc. But I'm sure that I will launch something again. And as I mentioned earlier, we are a federation, so it's not really it's not up to the global board to start something. But anyone who is affiliated with Igdor, who would be interested in getting affiliated with Igdor, can start something. It can be something that is already running. It can be someone saying, "Hey, I'm running a co-working space here in South Africa. It would be really cool to join Igdor and make this an organization under Igdor, under the Igdor umbrella." So we are a federation, and it would be awesome if people wanted to start something up or already have something started up and wanted to bring it to Igdor. a physical campus or many small ones or whatever. That would be awesome. And you mentioned the possibility to do a PhD or similar.
Yes.
So that's part of the MOOST, the Massive Open Online Scientist Training that I mentioned very briefly. The plan is to offer professional scientist training that will be available to anyone in the world, regardless of whether you have an academic degree or not. It may be that you only want to take one course or two courses, or it may be that you want to take the whole full program. The preliminary plan is to sometime in the future have some type of collaboration with a traditional university in order to hand out formal degrees, while the actual training, the scientist training, would be at Igdor. But we are caught up with administration, so we're not there yet. Someone asked previously
Yes.
about access to journals.
Oh yes.
Yeah, Sci-Hub, always Sci-Hub. Use Sci-Hub. It's remember to in order to access Sci-Hub, you may have to have VPN activated. People may forget that, and they go to the site and they can't see it, they can't access it, and that's because you don't have VPN activated.
Thank you. I think we've gone through all the questions asked in advance. And let me just have a look at the questions on the chat that we just had during.
David asked where I am. I'm in Sweden. I'm in the facility of Mullvad. Mullvad is one of Igdor's collaborators. They run a VPN service. Mullvad.net.
Okay. Ellie, I'm just going to ask is there any questions you selected at all?
I think there are, if you don't mind, but I think there are a lot of questions about how to measure quality of papers. This is something that came up in a few questions in the chat. People are concerned that quantity is easy, you just have a number, but quality, how do you assess it? How do you measure it to make it count, really?
Good question. So I'm stuck with the term measure because that's a quantitative thing, right? So if we want to move away from quantity and focus on quality, as long as you do your best in trying to seek the truth, I think that's quality. And quality is also to make it possible for everyone else to check what you have done, to check your arguments, to check your evidence. And I think that's the best we can do. You cannot really measure it, or you should refrain from measuring it, I think, and simply make it transparent so that others in that particular area can look at it, because no one else from another area can really say whether it's good quality or not without looking at the actual evidence and the actual data, everything you've done.
Okay. Another question is if someone is currently affiliated with, or the only affiliation is currently Igdor, could this reduce the chances of their project being funded?
In the best of worlds, no. But we are dealing with traditional academia. The funding agencies are used to the traditional academia. So I think the truth is yes, depending on where you apply from.
Okay. Another question is, if someone wants to use data made available by an Igdor researcher, should there be a copyleft share-alike mechanism?
The share-alike is a bit of a problem. So researchers with Igdor, if they should share the data with a share-alike, now I think as open as possible. So the 4.0, I don't remember the actual, or only 0. I'm not sure, maybe someone else knows this better, but as open as possible. And the share-alike is not actually as open as possible, since it is saying that you must do this or that with it. So.
Okay, and another of the questions asked in the chat today. So someone is asking if you could speak briefly why it is Igdor's policy to not accept master's level researchers.
We do. So we have just, during our last global board meeting, we have meetings once a month. And during the last meeting, we decided finally on which categories to have, affiliation categories to have. So we have 2 categories, researcher and researchers in training. We continue to have that, but we will be more strict on the researcher in training, that people will have to be, I think, this particular thing we haven't decided on yet, but I think what we're leaning towards is to have the researcher in training should be for master students and doctorate students, and not for people who are not in training. So we will allow researchers who are researchers but not have a formal doctorate degree. They will simply be called researchers, just as others. Right now, they are researchers in training, and that will be changed. But we will continue to accept master students as researchers in training.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, I think we've gone through the questions. Yeah, most of the questions asked in the chat.
I do have a question.
Have you got another one?
Mine. Yeah. It's more of a personal question, but so we've talked about, some of the repercussions of being part of Igdor, and I was wondering, it seems like a dream to me where you can prioritize your family, you can have a very good work and professional life balance, and you can make a difference in academia with open research. What's the catch? Yeah, we've talked about credibility, but in your own personal experience, not about being silent or not about the referencing, but is there anything that you would say, think about this before applying for Igdor?
Say again, can you repeat the last sentence?
So if someone was to think about, I would like to apply to it, I would like to be part of it, what would be your advice to, well, you have to think about this aspect first. You need to think about this twice because this is an important part of it. what would be your advice in that regard? What is the focus on, before you make your decision, although it's a great one, you need to think about this.
Yeah, you need to be very independent. And I think most people know already if that is a good description of them. Have you been able, or would you have been able to do your PhD alone with a supervisor that is not very present, for example? If the answer is yes, then yeah, I can do my own thing. That's part of who I am. Then do go ahead. But if you feel that you do need people around you all the time, that you need physically to have people around, if you're not willing or have the strength or interest to do your own thing, if you're the type of person who say that, yeah, I would have been happy to become a vegan if only I wouldn't have to defend my choice all the time at dinners and with people and colleagues, or if you say that, oh, I'm a vegan when it's socially suitable. But I do eat meat with other people when it's when it would be socially awkward to say no. Then perhaps it would be easier to continue in traditional academia.
Very good. Very interesting.
Maybe a bad comparison. But
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah. I think there's one. One requirement for Igdor is to produce high quality research, but so I think there's still the question: how can we satisfy this requirement if we don't have like a tool to evaluate it?
how do you mean a tool to evaluate the quality
of research? I think there's still a question in that sense.
Yeah, whether we should have a tool. Yeah. Someone is clarifying now. No?
Yes.
Sorry, reading now. Yeah, so one part of Igdor is to not be checking in on researchers all the time to see whether they are doing what they're supposed to do. We do offer screenings of COC adherence, which simply means that we do check whether occasionally whether our researchers publish in predatory journals or whether they different things that are possible to check, whether there have been comments on PubPeer, etc. on people. We do check that occasionally, but we are not like a traditional organization, academic organization, in the sense that we are measuring our researchers, that we're collecting, asking them to complete annual forms, reports on what they have produced, etc. So I would say that there's no need to produce anything when you're affiliated with Igdor. You can spend 50 years on one project and ending up with the conclusion that, hey, this was a bad idea, so I don't publish it. And that's perfectly fine. So I don't think we should measure people.
Do you mind if I may jump in on this quality thing that keeps coming up? I think you're right. We shouldn't judge one another on this. I think it's a personal responsibility as a researcher to make sure that our work is up to, you know, a good standard. And we have now tools that are helping us. For health research, we have something that is called the IGDORE network that has a list of all the guidelines that have been published on all kinds of things. For example, Prisma for systematic reviews. If you're doing neuroimaging, you have also guidelines about this. So it's what you need to report to be reproducible, what you need to be able to say, and you need to tick all the boxes. Some are essentials, some are optional. But I think we have now tools to help ourselves to produce high quality, but we cannot judge each other on that. One question that is often fun to ask ourselves is, if someone was going to include my paper, my project into a systematic review, would I pass the risk of bias? This is, I mean, you should be able to say that your paper doesn't have any kind of bias and is good. So evaluate yourself and use the tools that are around you instead of having to wait for someone to evaluate your own work, because that's how science has been failing all along, waiting for people to say that your job is good or not. And now we're judging based on numbers, like you said. Quantity is not good because we cannot check the validity of it. So do not wait for your quality to be evaluated, but make the step forward yourselves. And that will make life easier, and initiatives like Igdor would be, it makes sense then, because if everybody does that, then we're all moving towards, you know, high quality research. So I do agree, we should not evaluate each other, but ourselves, that's fine.
Yeah. And maybe it's easier to talk about identifying bad science rather than identifying good science. And we don't want people to engage in bad science, but good science is, you know, it's you can do your best and you think that's good. And 10 years later, you look back at it and think, oh my God, what did I do? Why did I do that? So, you know, good is not written in stone, but bad kind of is. It has been defined for at least 200 years, p-hacking, etc. So that is much easier to identify and say that we don't want that.
Absolutely, and thanks, Maria, for that. Yeah. Yeah, again, so I think we've gone through the questions. I would like to kind of basically close the session, if you're okay, Rebecca, with that, and to again say thank you very much for you know, for doing the talk today. It's been very, very interesting. We would also like.
Do join on scienceandacademia.org. You can sign in with an ORCID account, with okay. Twitter, GitHub, Google. So you don't need to create your own new account. So do log in there and join the discussions there. You can continue asking me questions there if you like, or raise new topics.
Excellent. Thank you, Rebecca.